There you go. So the first boss is called Skeram. Now this is a 6-tank fight. You can technically make do with less, but it's realistic that you're going to want 6 tanks. The boss is tauntable, as you can see, and you're going to want 2 tanks on each of 3 platforms, as you can see in the diagram here. The reason why is because the boss can occasionally mind control a random player. When this happens, they do 300% extra damage, and they must be polymorphed. Because of this, you have the 2 extra tanks, or you have the 2 tanks on each platform. So this way, when the boss goes to either the platforms with a different mechanic, one of the tanks can pick it up, and if that tank or one of the other tanks gets polyed, well, then you have a backup tank there and ready. And trust me, it's gonna happen, and you're gonna hate yourself. On top of that, you're going to want 1 mage on each side. You can just have them, if you see here where the RD piston heels are, you can have them kind of just in like a little bit of the lip here, just ready to polymorph. And all they want to do is literally just go and polymorph whoever gets mind controlled. So you want to have 2 mages pretty much on polymorph duty. Like they'll DPS and stuff, but the second there's a poly, they stop. The second there's a mind control, they stop what they're doing and they polymorph. So just have 2 mages constantly on poly duty. Occasionally, the boss will also blink to one of the 3 platforms, which will completely wipe the aggro of, the boss. And once he teleports there, on top of the aggro being completely just destroyed, the other 3 tanks are going to be one to pick it up. And this is because if he does happen to get aggro on a healer or something like that, he will start using Earth Shock, which is a large amount of damage, but can only be used on players or that are like far away. He only uses it when basically his target is far away. So that's why the tank's going to pick him up immediately. So this way he doesn't start Earth Shocking and like 1 to 2 shotting a lot of people. It's pretty simple. It's not as difficult as you think. And occasionally he will go and use Arcane Explosion. This is really simple to handle by just having, the second he teleports, just have the melee go and follow in and just interrupt him. An easy way to handle this is just to put 2 or 3 melee on top of the tanks you have there, just there ready to interrupt at all times in case he does teleport. Realistically though, you should be fine without this and just have the melee, because it's a very small platform, just run up and down the platforms. It's not that big of a deal, but there are different ways you can handle it. Then on top of this, the boss at every 25% will split into 3 forms, with 2 of them being weaker and 1 of them being his main form. This will happen 3 times throughout the fight, 1 at 75, 1 at 50, and 1 at 25%. When this happens, you want to kill the 2 weaker ones first. It's going to be really easy to tell, especially with being able to see HP, because it's going to be the weaker one. These guys are pretty much exactly the same. They're just infinitely weaker, and they're super quick to kill. Just kill these guys and then go back to doing the boss normally. This boss is honestly not difficult. I would honestly be surprised if guilds legitimately wipe on him. I can see guilds wiping because people just not doing a poly or something, but if you guys just have a halfway decent team, you guys are probably going to one-shot this boss. This boss is nothing new. It's nothing difficult. It's nothing crazy. It's just sit there and do damage, basically. It's really simple and really straightforward. Now, if you want to, you can pop a Greater Nature Protection Potion on this boss just to be safe in case he does start popping Earth Shocks into the party. That's fine if you want to pop one. There's nothing wrong with that, but it really shouldn't be necessary, and neither should really any nature resist be necessary, because he should only be using Earth Shock from ranged, and there should always be somebody in melee that is pulled aggro. So realistically, nature resistance should not be needed whatsoever. Like I said, this is the 6-tank fight. The names in the top left-hand corners you can ignore. Those are just the tank assignments that I have in my head right now for our guild, so don't worry about that. Next up is the Bug Trio and an optional boss. Yes, these are tauntable, and the loot will depend on which one you kill. And the order that I'm going to be going through this one is the easiest. This is a 3-tank fight, and like I said, I'm doing the easiest order. There is difficult, there's medium, and difficult orders, and it just really depends. Personally, though, I'm just going to be going over the easy one because we're going over kind of first clear stuff here. So this is the one thing where it's really simple, and the strategy is kind of the same on how you would handle these. It's just you mix it around, basically. So let's go over each of the bosses, and we'll go over the simple strategy and whatnot. So the 3 of them go like this. Kree is the first one you're going to want to be killing, and this guy does Cleave and Thrash, which the Thrash is 2 extra hits. He also does Toxic Volley, a stacking poison damage that must be dispelled, and then when he dies, he leaves a poison cloud, so move him away from the other bugs when he hits low, and the melee can transition to the other bug when he is about to die, and the range can just finish him off. Next up is Yaj. Cycle interrupts at all times, so you're going to want to have probably about 3 to 5 melee on Yaj at all times, just for the interrupts. But luckily, you're probably going to have them all close together and kind of clumped together and AoE them down. So this shouldn't be too big of a deal, but once you start cycling and maybe they have to split up for whatever reason, you want to keep 3 melee constantly assigned on Yaj at all times, so this way they can always interrupt the greater healer. He also has the ability to cast an AoE fear, so you want to keep the main tank fear warded, or make sure they're stancing to Berserker Stancer and Berserker Raging before this fear goes off, or whatever, but make sure they're constantly fear warded, Tremor Totemed, whatever, at all times. This way they don't go running around and make things a mess. The other 3 melee, it's okay. I mean, realistically, that greater heal is not going to go off during the fear. And if it does, that's just bad fucking luck, if you ask me. The range can still be able to interrupt, so the mages can counterspell and stuff like that, so it isn't that big of a deal. And then when this one dies, he spawns a bunch of weak mobs, and honestly, the tanks can ignore this. The DPS just obviously focus them down and kill them real quick. Then finally is Vem, the one we're going to be killing last for the easy fight, and keep this boss in a corner. Basically, we were going to put all the bosses in the corner against a wall, and you want to have this one turned away from rage, because he'll knock down any players in LOS. The basic theory is to have all 3 bosses kind of like in a corner cubbyhole right here, and have the other 2 kind of faced away, like the tanks are faced away, and have Vem kind of faced almost like so Vem will be faced this way and the other 2 will be faced this way. So the bosses are still stacked up and able to be AoE down with cleave and stuff, but you can have Vem faced differently, so this way it doesn't use a knockback on anyone else but the assigned tank. You will also use an occasional knock away, which is go against the wall. Of course, like any other knock away, this reduces threat, so you have to be careful. Now, when this one dies, he gives the other bugs Vengeance, 100% damage, 150% attack speed. This is why this one's difficult. Killing this one first creates the hard mode, because all the other bosses will be harder. So like I said, it does create a little bit of a hard mode. Obviously, though, with different strategies, it's gonna be really easy. Now, the strategy in the traditional strategy people use is they're going to burn down Kree ASAP while keeping 3 to 5 melee interrupts on Yaj. Range to pick up interrupts on Fear in case anything happens. Once Kree is down, burned with split DPS between Yaj and Vem, getting most of the damage on Yaj. If interrupts become a problem, you can burn Yaj ASAP and then go back to Vem. Once Yaj is dead, clean up the ads and then burn down Vem. Tank use defensive CDs if needed. Whatnot. So don't worry that much. Overall, though, it should be pretty simple. Right? The simplest way to handle this is just doing a cleave strat. Have them all stacked up and then, like I said, face them in the little different corners. And just have everyone kind of AoE and cleave them down with the melee kind of focusing on Yaj a little bit. That's kind of what my theory is going to be. Next up is Satura. This is anywhere between a 4 to 8 tank fight. This is a very kind of vague. The boss is tauntable and stunnable, so keep that in mind, as you can use this to help the fight a lot with the paladins and warriors with concussive blows and stuff like that. So the boss is stunnable, so it's helpful. The boss has 3 elites with them, and the off tank, want to pick them up and DPS them down as soon as possible. The main tank will go and pick up Satura. The main tank will move against the wall, as they will use occasional knockbacks, and you want to kind of keep your back against the wall. The boss will also use Whirlwind as well as the ads. Will use Whirlwind, and they become AoE and they deal AoE damage and become too immune to stuns. This is a channeled spell, and once it's activated, all melee who are not the current tank should move away until the spell is over. It's around 15 seconds. Obviously, the current tank is going to also want to move because they don't want to eat that, but just keep in mind that the main thing is that the melee are out of the way, so just, try to stay out of the way is basically it. Once the ads are dead, have the tanks form a square around Satura, and then rotate taunts whenever she uses Whirlwind, as the aggro will reset. Again, the main problem with Whirlwind is the fact that it does do an aggro reset, so you just have to be careful. Luckily, though, while everyone's fighting the elites, you can do this. Yes, theoretically, all the tanks can do all these bosses can be fought with one tank. So realistically, you can easily do this with only 4 tanks, but having more than one tank makes this super easy. The easiest way to handle this is by having 5 tanks and having one tank assigned to each one and fighting them individually, and then individually burn them down while the 5th tank goes and helps out each and one of the mobs as they get picked up. I think it's a lot like a Magmadar fight, honestly, except you can use AoE and it's just assigning which one you're going to kill. It's not like Magmadar, it's similar to Magmadar in the sense where you just got to kill stuff in a systematic order in order for it to make sense. So don't worry. Or Major Domo. I said Magmadar, but I meant Major Domo. Sorry, Major Domo. The boss will enrage at 20%. Her ads are exactly the same as her, and they will whirlwind, and they need a tank to taunt them to keep them under control. Once the ads are dead, the tanks can move to the boss. Ads don't necessarily need off tanks, just people aware that they drop aggro. Same can be said with Satura. There's technically no need for an off tank or a taunt swap. It just makes the entire situation smooth in case something does happen. This fight will be tough as the healers will have to heal through massive amounts of whirlwind damage. If there's a DBM timer, you can have the melee kind of coordinate that way. Otherwise, just everyone be extremely careful, and I can expect wipes on this fight, but I honestly don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. Next up is Fenkriss. Now, the entrance is, as you can see, clearly labeled, so the tunnels are actually behind you as you enter, and going from left to right, if you are facing the entrance, the tunnels are 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, if you are coming through the entrance, they're going to be from right to left, with the right one being 1, the left one being 2, and the far left one being 3. Just figured I'd explain that. This is a 4 tank fight. Having more tanks does make this easier, though. This is a lot like the Nefarian, a lot like Phase 1 Nefarian. I think that's the easiest way to picture this is Phase 1 Nefarian, except you can tank the boss, is basically what's happening. The boss, so you're going to want 4 tanks. Obviously, having more is desirable to help out with the tunnels. You're going to want 2 on the boss and 5. You're going to want 5 tanks, 5+ tanks, with 2 on the boss and 1 on each of the tunnels. 2 bosses, the 2 tanks will swap after 3 to 4 stacks of Mortal Wound. This is a debuff that reduces healing by 10% per stack. When the off tank is not tanking Fenkriss, they wants to stand with the melee while the current MT points the boss away from the raid. This is to avoid cleave and get a Mortal Wound and stuff like that. The 3 tunnels should have at least 1 tank on each one. Obviously, having more will be helpful. And the tanks will only pick up the Fenkriss drones. The spawns of Fenkriss that come out must be killed as soon as possible, and all DPS will keep each one. Once every 60 seconds, a random player will be teleported and entangled in front of one of the 3 tunnels. You want to protect them and kill the ads that are running towards them and, handle it that way. Now, realistically, when fighting this boss, you're going to want to tank him in kind of near the tunnels. You really don't want to fight him far away. You want to fight him near the tunnels. My personal theory is to fight him in this little alcove in between 2 and 3. Have him kind of faced like right here in this in-between area, right this, and have the melee stand, and have the melee stand on like the left and right side of the boss while the tank stands right here. And then when it comes for the tank to switch off, the other tank will go in front, taunt, get the aggro, DPS will slow down for a sec while he gets aggro, and then the other tank will move over to the other side with the DPS. The melee DPS can then switch between tunnels 2 and 3 while going and helping out those tunnels, while the range can primarily focus on handling 1 and doing a little bit of helping out on the boss. And that's the general strategy. This boss is going to be super simple, and honestly, it's not going to be very difficult. As long as everyone is very aware of the ads, this boss is not going to be difficult whatsoever. Just try not to get overrun by the ads, and just keep in mind when people get teleported. Overall, though, the boss should be really easy. You really don't need your best tanks on the boss either. You can have your weaker tanks because they're not taking a butt ton of damage. There's no crazy mechanic for them to deal with. The main things are the tunnels. So if you want to have your weaker tanks on the tunnel, like the boss, and then have your more basically skilled tanks or even better geared tank on the tunnels, that would be a better idea though. If most of your tanks are pretty even geared like ours are, it isn't that big of a deal, and just have people do what they want to do. For the most part, I just kind of threw together a random list and am more than happy to change it in the future. Next up is Viscidus. I'm sorry if I am pronouncing a lot of these names wrong. I just am bad at pronunciations. This is a 1 tank fight. There's no need for any taunts, and this fight is easy, but it's a lot to go through, so bear with me here. First off, all melee should be using Frost Oil. For those of you who don't know what Frost Oil does, is it goes and it uses, when you're attacking, occasionally it'll go and proc like I think it's either frost damage or a frost bolt. I'm pretty sure it's actually a frost bolt on the boss. And basically the boss needs a certain amount of frost spells on it. I think it's like I don't know, I want to say 300, but that could be dramatically more in order to move into the next phases. So basically that's kind of where it's at. You have to go and you have to, get a bunch of frost damage on him and then go in. This boss isn't going to be hard whatsoever. I think as long as all the melee have frost oil and all the mages are using frost bolt, this is going to go by pretty smoothly. The boss will occasionally cast Poison Bolt Volley during phase 1. The healers need to be cleansing this off the raid as soon as possible. The boss will also leave a poison cloud called Toxin that deals nature damage every 2 seconds and slows people by 40% when they're in it. Obviously, the raid and the boss want to be moved away from this as soon as possible. DPS should be focusing on freezing the boss as soon as possible. Your damage is not important here. It's just the amount of spells you get off. So mages are going to want to be using rank 1 Frostbolt here. And any melee, if you want to have like super fast weapons on you, just get super fast weapons with frost oil, so you can do that. So if you want to get like the dagger from Ubrs, the skinning dagger, and use that with some frost oil on it and stuff like that, and then swap when we get into the next phases, that's fine. There are 3 different messages depending on at what point the boss is. The first message is Fenkriss begins to slow. This is where the boss starts to move 15% slower. Fenkriss is freezing up. The boss will start to move 30% slower. And finally, Fenkriss is frozen solid is a raid warning that the boss is about to freeze and transition into phase 2. And once the boss goes into phase 2, the boss can only be damaged by physical attacks, and it won't be doing any damage. So all the healers and casters are just going to run up and auto attack. If they have a high level dagger or weapon or whatever they want to use to kind of just auto attack, that's your best bet. Is just to go up to the boss and auto attack it. And of course, the melee DPS and all the physical DPS will go absolutely balls to the wall crazy in terms of DPS. You get 3 different messages depending on how far cracked the boss is. There is Viscidus begins to crack, which is 33%. Viscidus looks ready to shatter, which is 66%. And Viscidus looks ready to shatter again a second time is a warning you'll get when he's about to begin phase 3. Phase 3, globs of Viscidus will spawn, and each of them contain 5% of his health, with 20 in total. For each glob you kill, the boss's max health will then be reduced by 5%, and theoretically, if you kill all the globs before they get to the center, the boss will be dead. And this is the only way to kill the boss, when he's shattered. In the center of the boss, once the globs get to the center, though, however many globs are alive or made it to the center is how much health the boss will have. So if 10 globs made it to the center, the boss will then start. You'll then start the fight over, but the boss will have 50% of its max health, of which it had normally. So if you guys kill 19 of them, the boss will have 5% of its health, and just so on and so forth. So it really just depends on how quickly you can get those globs done. Theoretically, one transition Viscidus should be pretty easy, but realistically, when it's our first time doing it, we might probably get 2 or 3. But it honestly just depends on how big those globs are. They might be super simple, and it might be a one transition fight, or it might be 2 or 3. It's hard to tell, but honestly, realistically, it's probably gonna be 1 transition pretty simply. Next up is Princess Hahuran. This is the big boy problem for a lot of this is just where a lot of the raids are going to have problems. This is the biggest issue I feel in AQ40. Up to this point, the bosses honestly are not that hard. They have some mechanics, and maybe Satura has a little bit of a problem, but for the most part, the bosses have not been this hard. This is kind of where the biggest problems are going to lie in, and not because of difficulty, but just because of how much damage is going out. This is only a 2-tank fight, though having other tanks on ready isn't necessarily going to be a bad thing. All melee, you're going to want to have 15 plus in total, are going to want to have 115 HR. This includes your tanks. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because while there is a strategy to have your tanks not be the soaker, you do want your tanks to have the nature resist, because they will be taking nature damage, and in case shit goes wrong, you want to have them be prepared. And like I said, they will be taking nature damage throughout the fight, so having the resistance on them is going to be useful. I know a lot of the higher end guilds are going to not have probably anyone wearing nature resist, but realistically, we're going to go with nature resist just because it's the simplest way to handle it. You want to have 150 nature resist, or if you're one of the special people who are lucky to be in a hunter group, you're going to have 140. Do not bank on being in a hunter group unless your guild knows you have 4 hunters. Do not bank on being in a hunter group. Bank on needing that 150 nature resistance, and this is going for people in my guild and people who are in other guilds. Do not bank on having the hunter buff, okay? It may be 60, but don't bank on it. Bank on having the 40. Bank on needing to get the 150 and not the 140. So you need to have 150 unbuffed. Once you with the potion, once the magic resistance potion, you'll be at 200. At 30%, the boss will enrage and cast poison bolt volley on the nearest 15 players every 3 seconds. This is 2000 damage pre-resist. Obviously, when you have 200 nature resist, the damage is going to be lowered by a good portion. And considering this is going to go out every 3 seconds, this makes it a lot more, manageable. This is very simply put. Once you get to that 30%, it's literally just Veil, but without infinite mana. That's literally all it is. It's just Veil, but if you didn't have infinite mana. The hunters must train shot the frenzy right away. If not, he will start casting poison bolt volley every 3 seconds while he is frenzied. Tanks will want to start to swap at 5 to 7 stacks of acid spit, and the threats are not taunt swaps, or the swaps are not taunt swaps. They're threat swaps. You have to go and essentially let the other tank pull aggro higher, while the other tank will go and kind of chill out for a little bit while he drops the stacks, and then you'll swap via threat. So this is definitely a threat fight, and you have to be very careful, though this shouldn't be too big of a deal because this boss is very much so a marathon and not a race. It's not Firemaul where you want to kill it as fast as possible. For the first 70%, it's just chill the fuck out, let the tanks build a big threat lead and kind of relax a little bit, and then the second you get to that 30% mark, you want to have the tanks to have a huge threat lead and go crazy. Wyvern Sting will hit all nearby targets, so all the melee, and should not be cleansed on any of the melee that are hit, except for the 2 main tanks. This is because once clearing it, it will deal 3,000 damage, and you want to have big heals prepared. This is also where the nature resist gear comes in handy, because once they are cleansed, they can resist at least some of that damage, so this way it's not as devastating. But realistically, your tanks shouldn't get one shot anyways from this, so just cleanse it. They'll be low on health, probably about like 30 to 50%. So just, bear that in mind that they're going to be low on health, but they should be at a manageable amount. Next up is Twin Emperors. Twin Emperors is a fight that a lot of people are looking forward to, and so am I myself. This fight honestly really isn't going to be that difficult. There's a good bit of mechanics to handle, but it really isn't that difficult, and it should be a pretty simple fight. This is a 4-tank fight with 2 of them being warriors and 2 of them being warlocks, and your warlocks want to have, I believe they want to be at 300 fully buffed up, and I believe that's about 150 or 200 shadow resistance unbuffed. I could be wrong, but it's around there. I'll probably have it on screen if I decide to actually edit this video. You want to pop greater nature protection potions for this fight, just because there is some there is some shadow damage that will go out periodically. So occasionally, or if something happens, it's just better to be safe than sorry. So you want to have some greater shadow protection pots on hand. Also, keep in mind you want to kill all 5 defenders before even starting the Twin Emperors, and these defenders are found in the previous room/tunnel. Make sure they're all killed, because if they're not, they'll run into the room and start attacking you during Twin Emperors, and it's just not a fun time. You don't want to wipe to that. Just trust me. Just make sure you kill all the defenders. The Emperors must be separated at all times. If they're together, they have abilities like Heal Brother and stuff like that, and you just keep them separated. Just honestly keep them in their own little corners. It's fine. The bosses will occasionally teleport and swap places every 30 to 40 seconds. The warrior tank in their designated area. So for example, if there's warrior tank in Vec Lore and they start to teleport, the warrior tank then wants to go in and pick up Vec Nalash when she comes in. If there's warrior tank in Vec Lore in the Vec Nosh area and they start teleporting, the warrior tank wants to actually move out of the way, and the melee want to transition over to Vec Lore, and the warlock tank will be at range, of course, prepared to pick it up. The reason why the warrior tank and the melee don't want to be nearby when he comes in is because he will use an AoE ability called Arcane Burst, which will knock people back whenever there's people in melee and do a bunch of damage. So you just don't want to have that extra damage going out. It's just not fun. On top of when they do teleport, keep in mind that their aggro tables are completely swapped. The aggros are not the same. It is essentially starting the fight over again with your threat. Threat is completely wiped and completely start over. So if you're having a threat problem before, during the fight, maybe people are too close by, this is a perfect time to remedy that, because everyone's aggro is going to be at 0 now, so then the tanks can go and start ramping up their threat a little bit more. Occasionally, Veclore will cause a scarab or scorpion to grow in size and explode out of 3 seconds. You just want to move out of the way when this happens. Every 10 to 15 seconds, a scarab or scorpion will become big, and the ranged DPS are going to want to kill this ASAP. The reason I say range is because, well, either way, they're going to grow big, and the ranged DPS don't want to be near the big ones anyway. So if they notice it's big, just start attacking it, and after 3 seconds, they'll probably die. So there you go. Of course, there'll be DBM timers for all this, so just keep in mind. Yeah, overall, though, it's a pretty simple fight, and it shouldn't be too difficult. You want to keep them separated, so you're pretty much just going to fight them on each of their like left side and right side. It's pretty simple. And yeah, just have the melee kind of run around in between the two. Just run in between, go woo, back and forth. And the range will just focus on killing Veclore. And mainly the range are going to be focused on dealing with the scarabs. Realistically, the range are going to be focused on, like the mages and warlocks are going to be focused mainly on dealing with the scarabs. They're going to be doing a little bit of extra damage to the other guys. That's basically the best way to put it. Next up is Ouro. So this is a 2-tank fight with the main tank and the current off tank, the one who has second highest, that are going to be facing or in front of Ouro and facing him away from everyone. This is to prevent Sandblast from hitting on the rage, so he'll always use it on the 2 people highest. So if the main tank is here, the off tank is with the melee, then the melee are going to hit it because it does hit the off tank as well. So the main tank and off tank want to be in front and kind of facing away to the raid. Sandblast will also stun the targets for 5 seconds, so be careful on threat. The main tank and off tank also want to be fairly close by because when sweep happens, they'll be knocked back and they want to be able to stance in the berserker stance, intercept in, and then go back into defensive stance right away. The boss will randomly burrow throughout the fight and begin the underground phase. When he's underground, the tanks will collect adds and kill them, while everyone else will avoid quake areas. The quake areas are designated by like rocks, shaking ground, and rocks falling. Just stay out of the way. Eventually, when the boss comes to come up, he'll use an ability called a ground rupture to surface. And basically, everyone wants to spread out as much as possible to decrease the amount of players hit by this, because if only one player gets hit by it, only one person is taking damage, and not everyone is going to. That's the simplest way to handle it. Once phase 2 begins at 20%, the boss will enrage, and he'll have access to all of his underground abilities on the surface. Do the normal stuff you do during phase 1, but have some off tanks, like a third and fourth off tank, run around and gather adds. The DPS should focus burning the boss at this point, while preventing the tanks from being overwhelmed by the adds. So basically, handle the adds as needed, but mainly just focus on burning the boss down. And that's it for the bosses, and we're going to move on next to notable trash, and we'll be able to handle the trash individually. So the first pack you're going to really run into is the Anubisath Sentinels. These come in packs of 4. Each one will have a random ability. Once the Sentinel dies, all the others will gain 50% of their remaining health, and also have the ability, gain the ability of the defeated one. So eventually the last one will have all 4 abilities of all of like the 4-pack. So these guys can be pretty annoying. The best way to handle these guys is burn them down one at a time and just completely ignore the others, as they'll be healed once each one dies, and they'll gain new abilities. So it's not even worth your time really paying too much attention to them unless they have a special ability. Immediately, the mages want to cast Detect Magic on all 4 of these guys as soon as possible. And this is right away. And this is to check for Fire and Arcane Reflect or Shadow and Frost Reflect. Obviously, simply put, they just reflect that type of damage back to the player. So just, be careful. The boss can also, the mobs can also have Mending, which is just a constant heal over time on the enemy. I put boss, and now it's just completely distracting me. I apologize. These trash might as well be bosses, honestly. They can also use Knockaway, which knocks away the target and reduces threat. They can have Thorns. They can have Thunderclap. So if they do have Thunderclap, just keep them away from the party. They can have Mortal Strike, and they can have Mana Burn, which just takes away the mana from casters. So to keep them away from casters, prevent them from being drained, from their mana being drained. And the biggest problem is Shadow Storm, which is an AoE shadow bolt that deals large amounts of damage to any players outside of melee range of the Sentinel. So I'm sorry, hunters, but you're going to become melee hunters during these trash packs a lot of times. I do apologize. You want to kill these. If you notice you have the Shadow Storm, immediately everyone should be on top of them. Basically, you want to move that one into the middle of the raid and just have everyone on top of that guy and just kill that one as soon as possible. This is the biggest annoying one, the biggest problem one. Yes, everyone can just stand there and kill the other ones, but realistically, this is the one you want to kill first, as it can cause the most amount of problems if someone decides to be a dummy. So you want to kill this one first if he does happen to get it, just to free yourselves of any problems, and then move on to the other 4. Now, actually, the first mob you're probably going to end up fighting is an Obsidian Eradicator, and he patrols in front of the first pack of Sentinels, so you just want to wait to see the Eradicator come, and then pull him, fight him alone, and then you can go back and fight, and then you can go and fight the Sentinel pack. You want to pull these guys separate from the Sentinel packs, otherwise you're going to have a huge problem, because fighting Sentinels and these guys could be problems. Obviously, though, if you're seasoned players who are really good, you'll probably handle it once you know what you're doing and get used to stuff, but for the most part, it's better to be safe than sorry. He will drain mana from any mana used within line of sight. I believe it's the 16 closest players who are in line of sight. And once he's full mana, he will cast Shock Blast and basically one-shot everybody in the raid within 30 yards. Warlocks and priests and hunters want to constantly be draining mana at all times to prevent this, because if it does go off, like I said, it's a wipe. So you just want to prevent this. And it's really simple. Keep draining mana up to prevent him from getting full mana, and all the other DPS will just kill him. Next up are Qiraji, Brainwashers, and the Fenkriss guard packs. You want to kill the Brainwasher first and then kill the Guardians. The Brainwashers have the following abilities: Cause Insanity. A random player will get mind controlled and just poly to this player to make it simple. He can use Mana Burn. The nearest mana user will have their mana drained and dealing damage to the player per mana burn. Not really much you can do about this. Just, again, burn this guy down as soon as possible. And finally, Mind Flay, a Shadow Dot as a channeled ability that can be interrupted. Not a lot of damage. Just be careful. Next up is the Fenkriss Guardians. They want to be tanked against the wall because they can use the ability called Impale, which does a large bleed and throws the person in the air. Like I said, tanks want to be against the wall to prevent themselves from dying because of this, and they'll also enrage. Then finally, it's the Bug Tunnel. Now, once you get to a certain point in the raid, you'll notice a gigantic bug tunnel with lots of Fenkriss drones and soldiers and stuff like that. And this is essentially the suppression room of this fight. And it should be handled very similarly, but I'm going to kind of go over the general strategy. But first things first, let's go over the Fenkriss soldiers' abilities, as these are the main problem you're going to be dealing with. They have the ability called Aggro Drones, which will cause all the drones nearby to come to their aid. They have the ability to cleave, and Debilitating Charge, which charges the player and reduces movement speed by 8 seconds. And of course, they also have Frenzy Aura, which is the main problem, which increases the attack speed and damage by all soldiers and drones nearby. Because of this, the soldiers should be killed immediately. You do not want these guys to go too crazy, as they can cause all the drones that are going to be on you to get even crazier, and it can be a wipe. So you see a drone, you kill it as fast as possible. The general strategy we're going to be doing is you want to completely ignore every mob but the soldiers. Only kill the soldiers. Just focus on the soldiers. Well, the tanks are going to be focusing on getting as much AoE threat as possible. So having Pally tank here, Bear tanks, tank with Immolation Aura, stuff like that, just going on. So this way they can constantly have a good amount of AoE going on at all times, keeping aggro on all those mobs. And you'll kind of move these guys as a pack. And then you'll also have a tank designate on picking up the soldiers, just picking them up, kill this one, pick it up, kill this one, pick it up, kill this one, and kind of go down in a cycle, right? And pick them up. Sorry. Sorry, and only kill the soldier. And so you guys only want to kill soldiers. About when you get halfway, you're gonna notice a little bit of a gap with a little bit of room for you guys to be able to. You'll have a little bit of room to be able to relax, and kind of take a breather, heal up, and mana up. At this point, you want to, or when you guys are overwhelmed, you want to kill all the mobs, including any soldier that might still be on you, which there shouldn't be any soldiers alive. So just kill all the drones. AoE, so then heal up and mana up, and then just repeat the process until you get to the end of the tunnel. Realistically, this shouldn't be too hard. The drones don't really hit too hard. It's a matter of just getting everyone used to the fight. This is a marathon, not a race. So do not try to race to the end of the tunnel. You just want to kind of slowly and systematically move through stuff, making sure all the soldiers are getting killed in a timely manner, and just slowly make it to there, and you'll be fine. Next up is the Anubisath Defender. Now, this is the toughest mob in the entire raid, and honestly is going to be the biggest problem. I really don't think a lot of the bosses are. I think these defenders can pose a big problem if you don't handle these correctly. So the main thing you got to keep in mind is they have the ability to summon an Anubisath Warrior or an Anubisath Stormguard. These are just general adds. The tank just want to pick these up and face them against the wall to prevent the cleave / knockbacks. As soon as this fight starts, the mages want to cast Detect Magic right away so they can detect whether the boss has a Reflect Fire and Arcane or Reflect Shadow and Frost. I believe he will always have one of the two, so it's a matter of just figuring it out. And of course, the mages will adjust as needed. And Warlocks, well, you're just fucking fucked at that point, so sorry, bud. You will also have one of two, which would be Meteor or Plague. Meteor, he will summon a meteor on top of a random player, dealing a massive amount of damage split evenly among all players that are hit. Basically, everyone melee and range want to stack into one big group at all times to soak this whenever this happens. Or he will have Plague, targets a random player, putting a debuff on them and doing a large amount of nature damage over time, and spreading the debuff to any player within 5 yards. And if a player gets this, you just want to run away from everyone and kind of chill out before, you know, before it to go away before you go back in. And finally, at 10%, the boss will either enrage or explode. And explode being honestly the better of the two options. If he enrages, you know, he just does more damage, attacks faster, normal stuff. But if he explodes at 10%, you know, he just blows up. So just run out of the way and, you know, don't wipe the party. Simple. Finally, you have the Qiraji champion packs. These guys are going to be a little bit of an issue, but they're going to be too bad. These packs consist always of one Qiraji champ and a combination of four either Slayers, Mind Slayers, or just, you know, any combination of the two. The kill order is going to be Mind Slayers, then Champions. Going over kind of what each of their abilities are. Champions have the ability to cleave, they have an AoE fear, and they can knock back, so tank them against the wall if possible. And they can cause vengeance and AoE enrage. Priest can dispel this from the mob, so it isn't that big of a deal. And tank the champion away from the group a little bit to prevent the fears from going off on everybody. You have the Slayers, which should always have a Hunter assigned to them because they can Frenzy and want to always be Trank-shotted. They have the ability to Cleave and Whirlwind, as well as Knock Away and an AoE Silence. So, of course, casters want to be as far away from the Slayers as they can. And finally, there's Mind Slayers, which have the ability to cause Insanity, which is just a mind control, so just polymorph them. Mana Burn, which drains the mana and fears nearby mana users. Mind Flay, a shadow damage dot that is channeled, and Mind Blast, which will hit a random player for a large amount of shadow damage. General strategy, assign all the hunters to a Slayer to Trank shot them at all times, pull the Mind Slayers away from the raid group and burn them down as soon as possible, and then go in and switch to the Slayers, and then finally kill the champions. Slayers and champs try to tank them against the wall if possible. Next, we have the Anubisath Warder and Obsidian Nullifier. The Warder, this pack will always consist of one Warder and two Nullifiers. You want to kill the Nullifiers first and then kill the Warders. The Warders will have, again, one set of each of these abilities, as well as Fire Nova, which is an AoE fire damage. They'll have either Entangling Roots or the ability to Fear, and then they'll have Dust Cloud, which reduces their chance to be hit by 85%, or Silence, which is an AoE silence, but healers can still max range shield the tank, so don't worry that much. Nullifier, Warlocks and Hunters want to focus on draining their mana. They have the ability to Cleave and then drain mana on the nearest 16 players. So, you know, the melee should be soaking a lot of this, but in case it does happen to go off, so under the casters, just be careful. And then finally, when they have full mana, they'll use Nullify, which removes all buffs and reduces the party health to 1, essentially causing a wipe. So you want to kill the Nullifiers first, then finally kill the Warders, and that'll give the tank who's tanking the Warder enough time to get a large amount of threat. And that's the end of the trash. That's all notable trash. There are other mobs, trash mobs that you might see, but it isn't that big of a deal, and you should be able to handle them perfectly fine. Have a fun time in AQ40.